3, Using Data to Differentiate Instruction. In Part 1, we built strong instructional teams, which emphasized the need for dedicated time to look at student work, assessment results, and lesson activities in instructional teams. In Part 2, we aligned instruction, which focused on the collaborative development of units of instruction and related assessments in our instructional teams. Now, in Part 3, we are going to use student learning data to personalize instruction and, building from what we learned in aligning instruction, continue working toward alignment, constantly making sure that what we teach is aligned with what is assessed. Teachers are constantly assessing the progress of their students, often without even realizing it. It is just what we do. Some would argue it is a sixth sense. When these informal data are triangulated with the results of more formal assessments, teachers and instructional teams are positioned to make great decisions about instruction and curriculum. What questions are teachers and teams asking? Well, here are a few simple ones to start. What do we expect a student to know? What does a student know? And what teaching strategies or instructional modes will best serve this student? To use student data, we first need to capture it, which leads us to our first indicator. All teachers test frequently using a variety of evaluation methods and maintain a record of the results. Since time is critical to reteaching and the learning process, the administration and evaluation of assessments, daily, weekly, monthly, should be something that all teachers feel comfortable and familiar with doing on their own. Some examples of various ways to capture student data will be seen in the following clips. Let's take a look.
One of the things that I've found for my particular students that I use is journaling. And I think students are thrown because most of the time they journal in English class. So I meet them at the door every day. It's actually a technique to take attendance as well. I meet them every day at the door with a journal. And every day I give them a topic to either write about or practice a problem, something like that. And I look at those every day. And literally it takes just maybe 10 minutes or so to go through quite a few journals. I'm not spending long amounts of time. But it's a direct conversation that the students and I have. If I give a topic and nobody can write about it, then that automatically tells me I've not done enough to thoroughly explain that topic. Sometimes I ask them to set goals in the journal. Sometimes I ask them to write about their everyday life, just to, again, create that relationship so they feel comfortable to come to me maybe when they don't understand something in chemistry, that we have that relationship between us. So I think the journal, for me, is a really effective way of evaluating what they understand and what they don't. A lot of times I'll ask them to take terms and use them in full sentences to see if they can make connections between the concepts. It's just a great tool. And although it sounds like a lot of time, it ends up being worth the time in the information that I get back. I also do homework quizzes, where instead of requiring the students to turn in homework and grade their homework, they practice the homework. It's non-threatening. We go over answers. But then I tell them ahead of time, we've done this concept twice now. I'm going to give you a little quiz on the homework type of problem. Well, then what we do is those students can retake and retake and retake those homework quizzes up until the test is given. Again, if it takes one student 5 times to do it and it takes another student twice, the whole point is having them master the information by the time we give the test. And hopefully then, with that repetition built in, it will stick with them all the way through our state assessment.
There are 2 ways that in my classroom my main ways of keeping track. One is when we're doing whole group activity, I'll assign certain students tasks to perform, and I keep a checklist as far as did they get the answer correct? If they didn't, what part did they get wrong? So then I can go back and reteach individually that student. And when they're working in small group at my table, I just keep a running log for each student. So I can quickly see if they had a skill, if they're missing a part of a skill, or if they have no clue. So I can go back when I'm reteaching in my small groups and go back and say, these 3 students only are missing this one component. I can pull them for 2 minutes and go over that with them.
Once teachers have captured and recorded student data, sharing it in instructional teams yields tremendous results, especially when you consider the purpose of assessments, which is to plan instruction, assess student mastery of standards-based objectives, assess strengths and weaknesses of the curriculum and instructional strategies, ensure alignment between what is taught and what is assessed, and to identify students requiring instructional support or enhancement. Do these purposes sound familiar? Do you remember them from Part 1 and 2 of this module? That is because assessment and student data are central to the work of instructional teams and instructional alignment. They are also central to differentiated instruction. While academic achievement is certainly a number one goal, there are additional data sources that will provide a complete description of the student as a learner. For example, behavioral data, parent-provided data, and student self-assessment data. This type of data is particularly useful, for example, when identifying which kinds of interventions or supports might work best for a student or in determining the source of a behavioral challenge at a particular point in time. Again, it provides a snapshot of the whole child. Now that we've identified the data sources, let's talk about how to organize and maintain a record of them. This sample student profile framework allows instructional teams to begin capturing the complete description of a student as a learner. It organizes performance, needs, and behaviors of students in one place. The student profile collects data regarding a student's interests and abilities from multiple perspectives: teacher, parent, or student. Collects classroom diagnostic data from unit tests, portfolio assignments, observations, and other classroom assessments. Collects instructional strategies and monitoring data that summarizes how a student learns best, his or her strengths, his or her weaknesses, and what additional supports he or she receives. This practice reinforces the second, third, and fourth indicators of Part 3. Instructional teams use student learning data to plan instruction. Instructional teams use student learning data to identify students in need of instructional support or enhancement and plan instruction accordingly. Instructional teams review the results of unit pre- and post-tests to make decisions about the curriculum and instructional plans, and to red flag students in need of intervention, both students in need of tutoring or extra help, and students needing enhancement learning opportunities because of early mastery of objectives. These indicators are similar to one another, but let's tackle them one by one. There are some subtleties among them. At its most basic level, student learning data can assist instructional teams in connecting the dots between what students need to know, what they know, and the best way to bridge the gap. Let's see how it's done. After having analyzed their student learning data, this language arts instructional team plans various ways to connect those dots.
Well, one tricky one that often comes up is asking and answering questions, like asking students to come up with questions that might be answered in the text. And that's something, too, that often shows up on the state assessment as well. But also, it's just a bigger idea, a critical thinking for reading. And it goes across content areas, like with science, like with the cycles that we're talking about, like the Earth cycles. I think just asking them to generate questions that might be answered in that text and using maybe leveled texts that we can get from the book room about that one topic, and then having them maybe create questions that the text might answer, and then going back and like doing that research. I need to focus more on nonfiction, I think, for my kids, because that's one too where meaning is falling apart at times and it's affecting content.
I think
their understanding.
In order to work on that point, to come up with question, is having them do like role play. They are the teacher. And so teachers ask questions. So what kind of question can you come up with? I think that would be like a play at the same time, but they're going to have to come up with questions.
And the importance of students understanding how to ask questions and how they're related to the text, which is that question-answer relationship concept, that if they understand where the questions come from, they can understand how they're going to find the answer. So just to kind of add on to what you said, teaching them the questions And if they're formulating the questions, then they should be looking at where am I going to find the answer to these questions.
Right.
Or maybe it's not all right there in the book, but it's really moving into that idea all across the content and language arts.
For the nonfiction books, what you can also do is, what I've been trying to do with the kids is having them create their own questions, kind of like the nonfiction books, but in social studies or in math or in science. You know, you're going to become the teacher and you have to ask the class 3 questions. What are the most important questions that you want them to understand? You know, you're going to become that book. How do they find the information? How do you ask them, you know, just getting them into the habit of asking questions and preparing questions and stuff.
You said something really key, though, about most important questions, and that's another strategy that we can be teaching across the curriculum with the fact that they have to determine the importance. What is important? So as you're thinking about how are they going to do that task, what are you going to need to be teaching them to do it? So another way to...
Right. And going back to the